And it was depicting what people did pre-flood, like why God was upset with all of the people on the earth. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of their hearts were only evil continually. So the Lord was sorry that he had made mankind. He was grieved. And then he said he was going to wipe out the mankind whom he'd created from the face of the land. Again, that was in Genesis 6. So it was showing what people were doing. One, and the one that really caught my attention was it was a picture or a setting of a party, and the party had a tables full of food, and you can tell the food was just kind of either being consumed or wasted. And so obviously that was a showing of gluttony, right? Like overeating or even being wasteful with food. And then the same setting, like kind of over on the side, there was dancing, and there was women with little snow clothes on, and then there was musicians that I believe were men. They were playing music, but the women were posed provocatively. And it reflected a lot of today's parties. It reflected a lot of what today's worldly parties look like. um, the lifestyle I used to be a part of. It looked a lot like those parties, club scenes. It looked a lot like club scenes. When you go to the club and you turn up to have a good time, imagine that. Oddly enough, though, when I went back, so I was so intrigued by it, I had to get a picture. And so I came back around it. And so I went in to get a picture, and I overheard someone laughing and joking, like saying something along the lines of, oh, this is what a Diddy party looks like. And, I didn't say anything. I didn't feel led to say anything. It popped in my mind to say something, but I think because I was just so caught off guard that I even heard someone say that, I just didn't even. I went to go get a picture. I got my picture and I kept it moving, type of thing. But as he said that, I thought so many different things. I thought, because this looks like a king's palace, I can see why he said that, because it looks like there's a whole lot of riches in this depiction. But in reality, this scene looks no different than what I used to see in the clubs, what I used to see at a house party. And so it dawned on me that a lot of people will look and think no differently amongst themselves, or amongst, and I'm not saying the person that made that comment parties and goes to clubs, I don't know that person. But I do know it was interesting that they were so quick to name that imagery as something they couldn't grasp themselves, but as a media pictured a false representation of what really is an average person's scenery. So you can say, oh, it's like a Diddy party, but Diddy parties, if you think about it, Diddy parties are really like a pyramid. Like, because he's so rich and famous and it's so exclusive, his parties were up here. But in reality, the things that were going on at this party could be going on in any kind of party with any kind of status. I mean, it was just glorified and glamorized because of who he is. But in reality, again, I got some of those imageries from a club that I used to attend every other weekend. I got those imageries from house parties that I remember being a part of, meeting friends, going with friends, whatever the reason we were at these environments, at these settings, they didn't look any different to me than what was being shown with the pre-flood depictions. So that really caught my attention, and I think it was the most intriguing because it reflected a lot of my old life, and I could see it that clearly. And then relating that back to people still live like that, and people don't even realize that what God is not satisfied with that's in our lives are things like that does not please God. And so starting with that, it was a time for me to reflect on who I was and be grateful that that's not things that intrigue me anymore. I don't want to be that person anymore. And I thank God that He has delivered me from being that person. And, um, my heart goes out to anybody that still thinks that lifestyle is fun. Because as we get older, I hope that we grow in understanding that that lifestyle is really a huge trap from the devil. It's consuming ourselves with the things that we want. And at the end of the day, that does not serve us. When I think of that depiction of the pre-flood biblically, one story that sticks out to me that kind of reminds me of that scenery, or what I would imagine that scenery to be, is the book of Esther. When I read Esther this time around, I sat on the king's behavior. And the king's behavior, first chapter, reflects to me a lot of what the pre-flood picture looked like. The king liked to party. The king liked to drink. And in this particular case, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that the king drank so much that he was drunk. He was a show off. Not only loved showing off his palace, but he loved to show off the woman that was his queen, Queen Vashti. So if you don't know, Queen Esther was actually not the first queen, um, sitting next to King Xerxes, and she was removed because she would not do what Queen Xerxes asked her to do. And he wanted her to show off her beauty in front of very prominent people in his circle, in his community. And she was not having it. And so, long story short, the first chapter of Esther is really about Queen Vashti saying no to the king and the king removing her, and she lost her queen title. So that's where Queen Esther came into play. He really was replacing the first queen that he had. So seeing that, though, I'm reminded of when I read about the king and just how similar his lifestyle was, which puts into perspective that he was not a godly righteous man. I'm not saying he was bad, evil, I'm not saying wicked, all those things, but it is clear that he didn't live for God. He was not walking with the Lord. He was definitely doing and living as he so pleased. His characteristics were not godly. Again, he was very about himself, about his palace, about his woman, very much so about him. And so, just thinking about that in the story Esther, I'm not going to detail the story, but when I was reading the story of Esther, it was the first time I really read it in the sense of looking at who the king was and what he stood for. Now, he still was about the law. He still had people that helped to make decisions. So he wasn't a careless man. He wasn't like all over the place, chaotic, but he definitely had the tendencies of a lot of just doing what he wants whenever he wants, and that he's just the king. So, and the difference between that and a godly man, there is a big difference in the two. One is someone that follows God, that walks with the Lord. And so that's something I want to talk about today, is what it's like to really walk with God, to really have a relationship with him. And so we see that in the story of Esther, Esther and Mordecai are the people in the story that walk with God. They obviously are Jews, and so it is important that we are aware that they are aware of who they are and the God that they believe in. And so, thinking about them two in this story and how they are used by God to save thousands of people. I would say thousands. I mean, at least hundreds for sure. There were hundreds of Jews at least that they were saving, just by the two of them working together with the help of the Lord, with following God and being godly people, being righteous people. And you might say, well, where do you see them being righteous people? Well, I'm going to tell you. We see Esther's life being a very example of what it's like to glorify him in our everyday lives. So we see the type of person Esther is, the characteristics that she portrays. One thing that I noted reading Esther this time around was when she was um, taking the proper steps to see the king. There was, after you could see the king, you could get something from him. You could ask him for something. But the people that kind of, I don't want to say groomed her, but the people that like prepared her for the night to be with the king, they made it clear like it's actually best if you don't ask for anything. And she didn't. So she wasn't about materialistic things. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with wanting nice things, but she wasn't there for the things. And that was an example of what kind of person she was, reminding me of Naomi. I'm sorry, no, reminding me of Ruth. Ruth, when she was, getting to know Boaz, she was not going after Boaz for the things that he had. She was going after Boaz because he was genuinely a nice man, a good man, a righteous man. And so in this case, we can't say that the king is righteous, but we can definitely say that she wasn't wanting what the king had because he had it. Um, the king actually wanted Esther. And so that's interesting because we know that her beauty got her to where she was. The beauty that was given to her by God. She had favor um, because of the way God had made her. And we know that the way God made her was a way that would be pleasing to the king, that would save, again, hundreds of people. But not even just by the way she looked, again, by her character, the way she carried herself. Um, when we think about, God using her, we think about what she had to do to make sure she was in line. She was aligned with God. When we see the way she moved, she was careful about making sure that she was aligning with what God wanted her to do. Thinking about when she fasted. Once Mordecai told her that Haman had had the king make the law that, they could basically wipe out the Jewish people in Persia, she said, we're going to fast. She said, I'm going to fast. Mordecai, you get the people to fast, and we're going to go and do it the way that we're supposed to, because I know that if I'm doing this, I'm leaning towards, she's leaning towards God. She's making a sacrifice, and she's willing to make that sacrifice for her people, and the people that were her people were also God's people. We see Mordecai did not people please. He knew exactly who Haman was. He knew exactly the background and lineage Haman came from. He was a complete enemy of the Jews. He was a part of the lineage of the king of Amalekites, who was supposed to be destroyed by King Saul. So he was not a good man generationally. He was against the Jewish people generationally. And so, seeing that Mordecai, knowing again his identity, he was a Benjamite. He was a part of the tribe of Israel. He was descending from the tribe of Israel, and he knew his people. He knew where they came from. He knew the people of that were against his people. And when it came to Haman, and Haman wanted him to respect him for no reason, just because of who he was and the status he had gained from being with the king, and Mordecai was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not showing you any kind of fake love. And that was standing with God and the people of God. He was standing on what he knew, and that was being true to God. And so when we think about that, and we think about our relationship we have with God, and we learn to know who he is and grow closer to him, like we have to stand on him and his word. And I pray that I continue to do that every single day in my daily walk of life. that I am boldly talking about Jesus because he's changed my life, that I'm boldly talking about God, the creator of all things. He created me before I even knew who I would be. But that's who I serve. That's who I walk with every single day. And I'm not afraid to say that. And as his child, as a woman of God, I can't be afraid to say that. When I read the story of Esther and I see her and Mordecai working together to save people that were people of God. I mean, they were going to be wiped out just because the king signed something that Haman paid off the king. And so thinking about even today when you say what money can do, and that's why you're not supposed to love money, because money can make and break. Money was literally getting ready to wipe out a whole group of people. Esther being someone that came in to make a difference for God, to glorify who he is and his people. How greatly those two people were used, and they were used because God had placed them at certain places at the right time. That's exactly what it's called, Haman's pride. And Haman's pride, it reminded me reading the word pride and thinking about Proverbs 16 and 18, where it talks about pride coming before the fall. And that's exactly what he was doing. He was being prideful, thinking so much of himself, how great he was, how close to the king he was, and how his plans were just going to all come together. His evil plans were just going to come all together. The very thing that the king Amalekite wanted to do, he was trying to do it all over again generations later. Wipe out the whole set of people that was under his control, under his type of authority, because the authority that the king had over the people that he was over. This story comes together a lot with good and evil, and evil trying to overcome good. But we know that with God being in control, that as long as we are doing what we're supposed to do, living by him, and so when we are doing the right thing, when we are trying to live holy, righteously for him, it will all come together, even when it looks like it's not. You got Haman making gallows, ready to kill Mordecai. And little does he know, the same gallows that he's making for somebody else is going to be used on himself. That's God. But in that little thing, you see it looks one way, but God has the bigger picture. God has the final say. Even in today's time, God has the final say. We go through little bumps and hurdles all throughout our lives, and those bumps and hurdles will say, I don't know. I'm questioning not who my God is, but I'm questioning, okay, I don't really know what this is for right now, but I'm going to keep the faith. Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Just like Esther and Mordecai, they were literally called for his purpose, to serve him for the people. The people they cared for, the people that decided, you know what, we do need to fast. Queen Esther commanded that they fasted, a woman of God, because she knew she wasn't doing this alone. And as believers, as followers, we have to understand, as followers of Christ, we're not living life alone. And keeping our lives aligned with God, it's the best way. I say it almost every time, but it's so true. Waking up and starting your day putting God first will surely have you on the right path for that day. Waking up and thanking him for waking up this morning is a sure start to a good day. because you're going to be able to see the good that God has all throughout the day because you start with Him at the forefront. You seek Him all throughout the day, praying, reading your Bible, saying no to fleshly desires, being encouraging to others for His glory, speaking His name for His glory.